Welcome to the Cornerbit Studio. I'm back with another Nomad Sculpt Basics tutorial. This time it's all about the Scene tab, or more commonly known in other 3D softwares, the outliner. Originally, this tutorial was part of my Symmetry Part 2 tutorial video, where I troubleshoot symmetry problems on this cute sculpt. But then I realized that it's quite a general topic and applies to how I organize all my 3D projects, so I've decided to split this section off to talk more about it. To give an overview of what to expect in this tutorial, I'll explain the basics of the Scene tab, which I'll be calling the outliner from now on. I'll then organize the outliner for my Symmetry Part 2 sculpt as the main topic. Just a small disclaimer, I'm not going through the outliner functions in order. This video will focus more on the practical use of an outliner. As always, the concepts in my tutorials are gathered from the accumulation of hours of sculpting various types of characters, from cool and detailed things like Elden Ring, to cute stylized sculpts like these. So I hope that no matter what type of sculpts you're doing, this video will give you good ideas on how to work on your own outliners. If you find this video helpful, you can check out my Basics of Symmetry tutorial series, particularly Part 2 on troubleshooting symmetry mistakes, where you'll see how an organized outliner plays an important role in dealing with symmetry problems. I'll link it in the description when it's out. Let's jump right in. I have my Dragon Quest inspired corner stuck raven and cornerbit slime sculpts here, ready to be organized. To find the outliner, we can open it by clicking the top left icon here. This is where you can manage all the items in your Nomad Sculpt file. As you can see, I already have a bunch of things filling up the outliner. You can see that I've already done some organization by renaming some of the objects. This is how my outliner usually looks like after a few hours of sculpting, so I often dedicate some time to organize it when I feel like it's getting too messy. But if this is your first time seeing this menu, it's probably very confusing. So before we start organizing this, let's run through some basics. When we click the Add button here on the outliner menu, we can see a bunch of things that we can add to the scene. If I click on box, I'll add a new box to the scene. If I simplify the current sculpt that I have, you can see that this sculpt consists of spheres of different sizes, group nodes to group them together, radial repeater to create the flower petals, and mirror repeater for the symmetrical parts of the sculpt. When we go back to the Add menu, we can see that each type are represented by different colors. You may notice that the same colors are reflected in the outliner. So if you create a new primitive, like the box we created just now, it will appear in the outliner with the same orange color. A new group created will be the same blue color, and repeaters will be red, and so on. Not just that, if you look closely at the icons on each item, you can see which one they correspond to. For example, the double triangle icon is the mirror repeater, and the arrow loop icon means radial. So even if we rename these in the outliner, it's easy to recognize what they are based on their colors and icons. If we forget what they are, just open the Add menu again to look them up. There's something else to take note for primitive objects. By default, they appear in the outliner in orange. If we validate the object to enable sculpting mode, it will turn white. For objects that I don't need to sculpt on, like the bird's eyeballs for example, sometimes I'll leave it as it is. So that's what the orange and white color means in the outliner. By the way, if you start a new file or open Nomad Sculpt for the first time, you can see a new sphere in the scene, which we can immediately sculpt on. Then this probably confuses a lot of first-timers, me included. When I add a new sphere and try to sculpt on it, suddenly it's not working. I can't sculpt on a new sphere. This is because the object has not been validated yet, as you can see with this menu appearing here. To quickly go through what this does, we can make quick adjustments to the object before we start sculpting on them. We can conveniently add a new mirror repeater by clicking on this button here. Now if we move the objects apart, it's mirrored. We can also click on the 3 dots menu to make other overall adjustments, like changing the polygon of the sphere. So as mentioned earlier, primitive objects are orange in the outliner, and validated ones are white. The sphere provided in new file is essentially a sphere primitive that has been validated, which is great because we can start having fun right away. Back to the Symmetry Part 2 sculpt. With any item in the outliner, including objects, camera, and lights, if there's a gray icon on the left of its name, we can click on it to expand it further. This will show any items parented to it. We can parent anything easily by dropping one item under another. You'll see this yellow L-shaped icon appearing as I bring the item close. Now when I let go, this item becomes the child item, and any gizmo transform on the parent object will affect the child. In general, we can easily rearrange things by dragging anything around in the outliner. It feels pretty smooth and intuitive. We can then click the gray arrows again to close the groupings. So from what I just showed you, you may be confused with how the outliner should be organized, especially if you're new to this. You may be asking, if we can parent anything to each other, how should I arrange this? Why are there groups for my cornerstock raven and skull sculpts, but no group nodes for my cornerbird slime? Ultimately, how you organize your outliner is up to your personal preference, but I'll show you my approach to help you out. Let's start with the cornerbird slime. We have the main body object, and clicking the arrow will reveal the group for the small flower on its head, which consists of 2 spears and a radial repeater for one of them. By the way, when we see colored bars on the left of each item, it means that there are instances of these objects elsewhere in the outliner. I've gone through instances in more detail in my Scale Armor tutorial, so check that out if you want to know more. Let's dismantle the cornerbird slime group so that I can show you how I end up with this arrangement. If my sculpt has multiple parts like this, I usually start organizing by grouping them together. Now we can select the group in the outliner and transform everything together with the gizmo tool. We can name the group as cornerbird slime, then collapse the group to keep the outliner tidy. So it's important to remember that once a group is deselected, it will disappear and we can only reselect it from the outliner. We can choose to make them permanently visible in the viewport by clicking this icon at the bottom edge of the outliner. Now we can see all the groups that exist in the file, and we can select them directly from the viewport too. This may seem handy for the scene right now, but it gets super messy in a complex scene with tons of them. You can also display other things like lights and repeaters permanently by clicking the other icons, but same thing, it's too messy for me when the scene grows in size, so I keep those off. So unlike a primitive where I have something selectable in the viewport, like the slime, which I can click and select and move around, a group is essentially an empty object with nothing visible to select, which is great for having an organized outliner while keeping the viewport looking neat. But since I don't see them in the viewport, it's pretty easy to forget about them, repeaters too. I've lost count of how often I've moved my objects away from the group's pivot point, whether by gizmo or through sculpting. Now when I click on the group again in the outliner, suddenly the object is far from it. It's even more obvious with the radial repeater, because you can see the petals repeating from this point with this pivot point here. So you can see how it affects the radial repeater. So keep the habit of checking the outliner and moving groups together with the objects parented to it. Even now, when I'm building up a new sculpt, I have the outliner pinned to my screen sometimes to keep track of things. We can keep going with this, since I know that this sculpt is done and I'm not making any more changes. I can just parent the flower to the body. Better yet, I can parent the radial repeater to the flower bud. Now with the outliner closed and the gizmo tool activated, I can select the body to adjust the overall sculpt, and select the flower bud to adjust the flower only. But this is where personal preference kicks in. I prefer to have the flower bud and petals separate, and I'll show you why later on. So I'll add a new group, rename this to flower, and drag the radial repeater into the group. Now cornerbird slime can travel around and be free. Of course, don't forget to bring the group with it. So there's no right or wrong way to organize your stuff. What matters is what makes sense for the specific sculpt you're doing and for what context you're using it for. For example, in this night rain picnic scene, I have way more cornerbird slimes here. The outliner list is super long, that's not even counting the stuff for the 4 night rain characters. To keep it more concise, instead of opening every single group to reveal the body object to then reveal the flower objects, I ditched the group so that there's one less thing in my outliner for each slime. That's 12 less items total in my outliner, which is quite a big difference. If I want to have flowers of various sizes for each slime, it's helpful to have this flower group to resize each of them. And because the flower bud and flower petals are not parented to each other, I can also adjust them separately. And that's why sometimes I prefer to group things together rather than parent them together. And that's how I end up with this arrangement for the cornerbird slime. You can see how the context of my sculpt affects the arrangement of the outliner. We can go crazy with the parenting if we want to. I can make a stack of slime poop where the top slime is parented to the one below it. With this hierarchy, I can rotate them in cute ways. I don't need to use groups or objects too. I can use repeaters to do the same. For example, if I want to create a ritual and have slimes dance around the skull, I can create a radial repeater, adjust some radial repeater settings, and use the radial as a group. I can also create groups for everything just for the sake of consistency, like look at how pretty everything is in blue. So you get the idea, it really depends on what you like. Moving on to the cornerstock raven, I have a mirror repeater for all the mirrored body parts. But I want to organize this better by having individual repeaters for different sections, just like what I've done for its feet. When I first started, I often used one mirror repeater for everything. This works well too. As I mentioned in my Basics of Symmetry Part 1 tutorial, it's a symmetry plane, not point. But as I sculpted more, I found that sometimes it's better to have individual mirror groups for different parts. One great example to show why I need multiple mirror repeaters can be demonstrated with Maximus' head sculpt. His eyeballs and eyelashes used to share the same mirror repeater. But after I sculpted the asymmetrical eyelids, the upper eyelash had to move down, and I had to remove the lower eyelash. If I try to delete the lower eyelash, it will affect the other side. And if I try to move the upper eyelashes down, it will be mirrored on the other side. Because this is just one object being reflected on the other axis. So I had to duplicate the mirror repeater so that I have one for his eyeball and one for his eyelashes, then validate the mirror repeater for the eyelashes to turn them into their own objects. Now I can move the eyelash on the closed eyelid down and uninstance it to sculpt it into place. And if I need to open his eyes again, his symmetrical eyeball is there. Something else that took me way too long to realize, but eventually clicked in my head, these repeaters are great for organization too. Like this corner bit bathhouse for example, I have the ropes organized under this radial repeater, and I have the wooden boards organized in another repeater, just so that I can keep the outliner as short as I can. Back to the cornerstock raven sculpt, I can still keep one mirror repeater for all the body objects, but as you can see from my examples previously, it can become a lot neater if I have them separate. I would say though for this simple sculpt, it's not really necessary to do so. It's just a habit that I built from sculpting more complex scenes, which will be the topic of my Symmetry Part 3 tutorial, where I'll show you my process to build a dynamic scene organically in 3D space. So I'll duplicate the mirror repeaters and name the repeaters as eyeballs, wings, and tail. It doesn't matter if you rename the mirror repeater or the objects, it's really up to you. I'm just doing this to show you that anything is possible. So while nothing is parented to them, it's a good time to move the repeater pivot points to better positions. So for the wing repeater, I'll move it up to this point of the wings. For the tail, I'll move it to where the tail is, like so. For the eyeball mirror repeater, there are things parented to it. To remove just the parent object, under the gizmo tool mode, you can see this button over here on the left side. By default, it's set to auto. For this specific case, I want to change it to object. Now with only the mirror repeater selected, I can just move it by itself. So I'll set it to where the eye line is, like this. Don't forget to change the target back to auto so that we can move everything together as usual. I can now move the objects to their relevant mirror repeaters. One cool tip to drag multiple objects in the outliner, I'll select all the wing objects, click and hold the last selected item. It should have a brighter highlighter color compared to the other objects. Now we can move all the selected objects around. I'm not kidding when I say that I've spent months moving things one by one because I kept dragging the wrong piece. And I kept wondering why Nomad Sculpt didn't have the function to move multiple outliner objects. But as usual, when I think that the app is missing something basic, it always turns out to be my own stupid mistake. So you're welcome. You can also do the same with objects scattered around the outliner. So I'll select all the tail objects by the checkbox selection, then move them under the tail repeater. I don't need the mirror repeater for the middle object, so I'll move that out. A couple more things. The eyeballs are above the beak, so I'll move the eyeballs up in the outliner too. I like to arrange the outliner as how they appear in the 3D viewport. That way I can easily find the things that I need, which gets more relevant if your file has hundreds of objects. You can see why I like the separate mirror repeaters too, because it's so much easier to see where the mirror pivot point is, which is also more relevant when the scene gets really huge. You can see that I have a mirror repeater for his bracelet here. If the mirror repeater for the bracelet is all the way here, it's very difficult for me to figure out what everything does. So this is way better. It's also useful for having custom settings for each repeater, so I can add a double tail for the bird this way without affecting everything else. Almost done. I have an extra group node that I don't need. To delete this, again click on the checkbox and click delete. Because we'll be troubleshooting this file for symmetry mistakes, I'll prefer to have the body object separated from everything else. So I'll select everything and move them out of the body parenting. Now everything is under the cornerstock raven group, and the bird is organized. Let's finish this up. The skull is pretty straightforward. Just rename all of this, and it's done. As you can see, there are many ways you can organize your outliner, so just do what makes sense for your sculpt and workflow. Most importantly, organize in a way that's not confusing, so that when you find a problem, it's easy to troubleshoot it. For the remainder of this video, I'll explain the other outliner functions that I haven't gone through. Some are cool UI features. Double-clicking on an object will put it in focus in the viewport. And when I have multiple items selected, I can toggle visibility for all of them. These are settings you can change in the Outliner Advanced tab. The third checkbox toggles the visibility of the instance indicators, but I find all these functions very useful, so I don't touch the advanced settings. So opening the Add menu again, I use spheres for most of my sculpts, sometimes blocks and cylinders, and planes for things like reference image planes. For tubes and lathes, I like to create them using the Tooth and Lathe tool from the right toolbox to draw the exact shapes that I want. Just be mindful that they are not centered in the scene when you create them this way, so set the gizmo setting to 0 to center them if you need to. I don't use array repeaters, and I've talked about curve repeaters in my skill armor tutorial. Essentially, they work the same way in the outliner, just like the radial and the mirror repeaters, where their properties will be applied to the objects parented to them. For cameras, I don't create them from here. I create them directly in the camera tab on the edge of the left top toolbar. Just set the camera angle that I want, then click Add View. I talked about the practical use of this in my microprep video, so check that out. I can also set a specific focal length and position a reference image for this camera angle. Once I make the changes, I can click on this down arrow icon and update viewpoint. We can see a small thumbnail of the reference image and the new FOV angle saved. Now when I switch off the reference image and change my camera view, I can easily go back to the one that I saved by clicking on this. Now the camera view is back with the reference image that I placed. Don't forget that selecting a camera view with a different FOV will permanently change the FOV for the scene. I can reset it by clicking on this. The same thing with lights, I create them directly in the shading tab here. We have to be in the lit PBR mode to see the lights menu. I already have some lights here, and I can create one more by clicking the Add Light button here. I can then change the light type to directional spot or point light in this setting here. As of now, we can only create 4 lights maximum in one file, so the button will be disabled once we have 4 lights. Something nice that Nomad Sculpt does automatically, when we create a new camera and light from these menus, a new group will be created for them in the outliner. So these are groups with the names cameras and lights created by Nomad Sculpt. Finally, at the top of the Add menu, we have the 2 checkbox and some advanced settings. These options allow you to set the positions of new objects created in the scene. I'll show you what Select Gizmo does first. With this enabled, when we create a new object, the Gizmo tool will automatically be selected. I'll demo this again. I'll select a random tool, then open the Add menu again. Now when I create a group, the Gizmo tool will be selected again. This is a nice feature since I usually move new objects into place before sculpting them. And it's even better because we have the option to disable it if we don't like it. I'll explain the advanced setting next. This allows us to set where new groups or specific repeater types appear in the viewport. They can be on the selected object, which is the local button here, at the world origin, or the gizmo's location. The only settings that I change for this is the group creation at world origin, and I'll explain why together with the on gizmo checkbox. To use the on gizmo option, we first need to select the gizmo tool. Now the on gizmo checkbox is usable. With this checkbox enabled, any new creation will appear at the pivot point of the selected item, and it will share the same translation and rotation values. Take note that this option overrides the settings in the Advanced tab. So this is what my workflow looks like. When I want to create something new, I like to select the gizmo tool with my micropad, then select the object where I want the new item to appear at. So I want the new item to appear on its hit. Now I can create a new group at this pivot point. When I want to group all my objects together, I will swap to a different tool on my micropad. Any tool is fine. Then create a group. Now this new group is at the world origin, which is usually the base of my overall sculpt. That's why I like to set group creation at the world origin and activate the gizmo tool whenever I want to create objects at selected places. And to create a new object at the world origin again, just select a tool that's not the gizmo tool. This option will be grayed out now, and create the group at the world origin. These functions and workflows will become very important in my symmetry part 2 and 3 videos, so don't worry if you don't get how to use them yet. I'll show you more practical applications of them in those tutorial videos. Just a few things left on the top of the menu. We have the delete button to delete things, lock to prevent object selection in the viewport, join to combine multiple objects together, and separate to split them back. Boolean, I haven't used this for my sculpt, but they are pretty cool. Back to my corner slime poop, I can select them all and combine them into one shape with Boolean. This is different from join, because joining objects will still keep them separate, but Boolean will combine all the shapes together into one mesh. I can also hide the upper and lower slime to eat away at the center slime. Now I have a cool donut shape. Or I can hide everything to form an object in the shape of the overlap areas. Next, clone is for duplicating objects, instance is for instancing, and this sync function is especially cool. If I select an instance object like the slime here in the outliner and enable the sync checkbox, now any outliner operation that I do here will be applied to all the instances. For example, I can add a new sphere, and this will automatically create new instance sphere for each slime. I only found out about this today, so I haven't really used it that much, but I can imagine using this a lot in the future. So enable this checkbox whenever you want to make changes to multiple instance objects. I hope that you have a good idea of how to use the outliner now, and I'll see you in the next one.